You know, every now and then a government audit comes out with a headline you just can't ignore. This is one of those. It involves a massive federal agency, billions of your tax dollars, and a process that sounds kind of boring, but is actually critical. So let's get into it and uncover the huge risk hiding inside these unclosed contracts.
$11.2 billion. Just let that number sit for a second. According to government auditors, that's how much money was put at risk of fraud, waste, and abuse. Now let's be super clear. This isn't money that was definitely stolen, but it was part of contracts that weren't managed and closed out the right way, which basically left the back door wide open for all sorts of problems. So, how does that even happen?
Well, to really get a grip on the risk here, we have to talk about a piece of government paperwork that's at the very heart of this report. It's called the contract closeout. It's the final, crucial step, and as we're about to see, it's a step that's getting skipped with some pretty massive consequences.
Okay, the best way to think about it is like this. Imagine you threw a huge event and told the caterer, just put it all on my tab. At the end of the night, you wouldn't just pay whatever bill they handed you, right? No way! You check it. Did you get all the food you paid for? Are there weird extra charges? Do you get any of your deposit back? A contract closeout is exactly that, but for government projects worth millions, sometimes billions of dollars. It's that final check to make sure taxpayers actually got what they paid for. So now that we get what's supposed to happen, let's dive into the specifics of this multi-billion-dollar problem.
This whole story really has two main characters. On one side, you've got the auditors, the Office of Inspector General, or OIG. Think of them as the government's own internal affairs. Their whole job is to be the watchdog for our tax dollars. And on the other side, you have the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. You probably heard of them as CMS. This is the gigantic agency that handles healthcare for more than 160 million Americans. And the OIG's mission here was incredibly simple. They weren't digging for some complex criminal conspiracy. They just wanted to answer one basic question. Is CMS following the federal rulebook when it closes out its contracts? Simple as that.
So, what did they find? Well, let's just say the results were pretty stunning.
Now, the OIG couldn't look at every single contract, of course. So they did what auditors do. They took a sample. They picked out 50 high-value contracts to see if the process was being followed correctly.
Just 50 contracts, but together they were worth that $11.2 billion headline number.
And out of those 50 contracts they put under the microscope, the auditors found at least one major, serious error in— Yep, you heard that right. Every single one of the 50 contracts they checked, not one was closed out properly according to federal rules. That's a 100% error rate in their sample. Just wild.
So what kind of mistakes are we talking about here? This table really lays it out. Look at this. All 50 contracts were late getting the final proof of completion. In 47 of them, that's nearly all of them, a required review to check for leftover money just never happened. And you can see the other issues: missing cost reviews, no closing statements. These aren't just tiny paperwork issues. These are the basic checks and balances that are supposed to protect our money.
And this has a real-world cost. Because those required financial reviews didn't happen on time, the OIG found that almost $439 million in extra funds were just sitting there, stuck in these contracts. That's money that should have gone back to the U.S. Treasury or been used for other important programs.
So the big question is, how does a major federal agency end up with a 100% error rate on something so fundamental? Is this like a new problem? Oh, not even close. As you can see from this timeline, government watchdogs have been sounding the alarm about this exact problem at CMS for more than 15 years. Back in 2007, they flagged a backlog. By 2015, it had exploded to 6,000 contracts worth $25 billion. So this isn't some one-off mistake. It's a chronic, systemic problem.
So when they were asked, why is this happening, CMS pointed to a handful of familiar-sounding administrative issues. People weren't sure who was supposed to do what, there was high staff turnover, they didn't have enough resources, and their computer systems weren't great.
Okay, so we've got a long-running problem, and we know the reasons why. So what's the solution? Well, according to the auditors, it's actually pretty darn straightforward.
The OIG made two really simple recommendations. First, finish the job. Go back and properly close out the contracts from their sample that were still sitting there unfinished. And second, write it down. Create and use clear, formal policies so everyone knows exactly what they need to do and when. Seems logical enough, right?
And to be fair, CMS agreed with these recommendations. But that is not where this story ends.
because while they agreed to the fix, they really didn't like the original diagnosis of the problem.
And this right here, this is the core of the debate. You have the OIG with its really stark finding, $11.2 billion was put at risk, but then you have CMS pushing back, saying, whoa, that number makes it sound worse than it is. We have other ways of keeping an eye on things. They also argue that the OIG picked a bad sample, that it focused on old, complicated contracts and ignored the recent improvements.
Here it is, straight from their official response. They're basically saying that the big, scary number is just the total price tag of the contracts the OIG looked at, not the actual amount of money that was truly in danger because of these other safety nets they have in place.
But the OIG was not backing down. They stood their ground, and they made a few really key points in response. One, their audit was specifically about the final closeout, which is the government's absolute last chance to catch mistakes. Two, those other procedures CMS talked about, they didn't actually meet the official federal rules. And three, and this one is a big deal, they found these same failures on simpler contracts too, which suggests the problem is everywhere, not just on the old, tough ones.
And that's where we're left. We have this fundamental disagreement between an agency and its own watchdog over rules and risks. And it all really comes down to this basic question of accountability, right? When we are talking about billions of dollars for our country's healthcare, is close enough ever actually good enough? This report seems to argue that that final check is the one that really matters.